The Detroit Lions and Matthew Stafford are finally on their way to parting ways and divorcing this marriage that, even though it looked like it had potential to be great for Detroit and for Matthew Stafford, never really got through the honeymoon phase. And it led to a bunch of losing seasons and zero playoff wins. The Detroit Lions never seemed to get away from shooting themselves in the foot when it came to every major move after they drafted Matthew Stafford. They could never get the head coaching position right after it seemed like they had the right guy there with Jim Caldwell. It never seemed they could establish a running game, even though they brought in a lot of names like Kerryon Johnson, DeAndre Swift, Adrian Peterson, and plenty of names before them. And even though they had a decent wide receiver core and a solid offense all around Matthew Stafford, the ultimate downfall was the fact that this defense never could get off the ground. The defense could never really seem to establish themselves in the league, and it led to, like I said, zero playoff wins. Even armed with possibly the most dominating wide receiver of NFL history in Calvin Megatron Johnson, this team never won a playoff game. Matthew Stafford only went to one Pro Bowl, and the Detroit Lions are basically where they were before they drafted Matthew Stafford, and that is in NFL poverty. And now in a league where it seems like almost half of the teams in the NFL are looking to change their quarterback and upgrade at the position, it looks like there's no better time for Matthew Stafford and the Detroit Lions to be looking for a trade. And I'm going to give you my 5 teams in which I think should make that trade for Matthew Stafford. First up is the Denver Broncos. And I understand that if you're a Denver Broncos fan or if you are an NFL fan, you might say that the Broncos already have Drew Lock. Well, Drew Lock has already proved, I think, through his first 2 years that he can't really be the franchise quarterback. And it's everything from decision making, it's everything from playmaking, it's everything from Drew Lock can't do what Matthew Stafford can. And if the Denver Broncos go through 5 to 6 more years of Drew Lock and keep doing the same exact thing where they don't make the playoffs every single year, then why wouldn't they try to upgrade to somebody like Matthew Stafford? Now, Matthew Stafford in this offense would have plenty of playmaking options with him. He'd have guys like Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, a couple of decent running backs with Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay if Phillip Lindsay stays. And an offensive line that, even though it's not the best offensive line, it's a little bit better than Detroit's offensive line, and it's one of the rising offensive lines in the league with a lot of young guys like Garrett Bowles, Dalton Reisner, Jawan James, a lot of guys that are decently established in the league and with enough room to upgrade it through the offseason as well. Now, the next team, in my opinion, that should try to facilitate that trade for Matthew Stafford is the New England Patriots. And, Bill Belichick is probably within his last years as the New England Patriots head coach. And having somebody like Matthew Stafford under him as the quarterback and with Josh McDaniels calling the plays for that Patriots offense, Matthew Stafford will be able to make up for a little bit of what that Patriots team lacks on the offensive side of the ball, which is reliable playmaking. N'Keal Harry has not been able to produce. Jacoby Myers has always been that next guy up that never really emerges as a full number one receiver. And Julian Edelman looks like he's going to be on his way out soon. So with that in mind, the Matthew Stafford trade might not work in terms of giving them the best offense possible. But I think if, comparing him to the rest of the quarterbacks that the New England Patriots could go after, Matthew Stafford is by far the best option. And he has by far the best chance of elevating this team's play and getting them back to the Super Bowl. Now, the next team at that number 3 position that should trade for Matthew Stafford, this is something I've talked about before. It's been a long time since I've talked about it. But the Las Vegas Raiders, I think if they were to try to make a trade in terms of sending Derek Carr to Detroit in exchange for Matthew Stafford, that would be perfect for both teams. The Detroit Lions would get a guy in Derek Carr that they could rally around, and the Las Vegas Raiders would get an obvious upgrade at the position. I think that, even though Derek Carr has somewhat flourished in that system under John Gruden, I think Matthew Stafford would be even better, and I think it would unlock more potential within that offense for the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think if the Raiders really, tried to think about it, if you're a Raiders fan or NFL fan that, talks about football, the Las Vegas Raiders with Matthew Stafford have a whole hell of a lot easier chance of beating the Kansas City Chiefs with Matthew Stafford than they do with Derek Carr. I understand that they beat him once in the regular season, but beating somebody in the regular season, especially somebody like the Kansas City Chiefs, means absolutely nothing when it comes to the playoffs. And if they were to have somebody like Matthew Stafford as their quarterback, with John Gruden calling plays, with somebody like Josh Jacobs running the ball, throwing to somebody like Darren Waller, who probably would be the best, receiving target since Calvin Johnson that Matthew Stafford has ever had. This team not only would probably be guaranteed to make the playoffs, but they might even steal the division from the Chiefs in a year or two with Matthew Stafford as the quarterback. So, like I said, in my opinion, that trade would be perfect for both of these teams. Derek Carr, he would go to Detroit. I think they would rally around him, and Matthew Stafford would give actual Super Bowl chance hopes to the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the number 2 team, in my opinion, that should trade for Matthew Stafford might be a little bit of a surprise to you. It's going to be the Chicago Bears. This team has already come out and said that this offseason they need to upgrade the position. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion that they're not going to bring back Mitchell Trubisky. I would say there's no chance that Nick Foles ends up winning the job, and they just need to have a quarterback in place that they can rely on. And they have a lot of their, they have their best pass catcher going out on free agency in Allen Robinson. If they were to get Matthew Stafford onto their roster and onto their team, I think that would almost guarantee that Allen Robinson would want to come back, because there's probably no better quarterback that he could just go sign with and play for in free agency. So getting Matthew Stafford, not only would they get Matthew Stafford, who is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, they'd probably be able to re-sign Allen Robinson at maybe even a little bit of a discounted rate. And the ultimate goal is to be able to be the best team in their division. And with somebody like Matthew Stafford as their quarterback, with that defense and guys like Khalil Mack, Roquan Smith, Kyle Fuller, and all those names, and an offense that, even though the offensive line is definitely shaky, they definitely have a lot of options, and there's no telling where the team can go in terms of Super Bowl chances. Before I get to the number 1 team, a couple honorable mentions that I kind of thought about. The New Orleans Saints were an intriguing option just because, him and that Sean Payton offense, but I don't know if I necessarily believe that New Orleans Saints are going to actually compete this year. The Washington football team was a little bit intriguing just because they're a team that's going to be looking for a quarterback over the next few years, even though they're not really going to have high draft position to get a top quarterback. Being able to trade for somebody like Matthew Stafford would definitely take their team to the next level. And the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers are definitely, they're going to be kidding themselves if they think Ben Roethlisberger is the guy for a couple more years. I don't even know if he's the guy next year. So somebody like Matthew Stafford with guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, James Conner, and all those guys over there in Pittsburgh, that would be a great offense as well. And the ultimate goal, like I said, is being able to win your division, being able to win a Super Bowl. And Matthew Stafford on all of those rosters gives them a chance. Now, the number 1 team that probably everybody has already thought of, and you've already thought of, is the Indianapolis Colts. They had Phillip Rivers retire over the year. They have not had a solid player at the position since Andrew Luck, when he was, actually playing every single game for the team before he got injury riddled, before they had to bring in Jacoby Brissett and Phillip Rivers. So, the Colts, they have a somewhat, they have a pretty good roster. I don't know if necessarily right now it's a championship roster, but like I said earlier with the teams I brought up in my honorable mentions, having somebody like Matthew Stafford takes your team from a good team to a pretty much championship contender when you have the roster that they do. They've got a young budding star in Jonathan Taylor who's going to be an every down back. They've got a, aged star in T.Y. Hilton, but he's got some guys behind him like Michael Pittman and Zach Pascal. And at the tight end position, they've got some solid options as well. And an offensive line that has been, over time gaining respect as the best in the NFL. I think it's obvious that Phillip Rivers' performance, especially late in the year and especially those last few throws in the playoffs, it's a very obvious step down from what the Colts are used to seeing in guys like Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning, and many before them. So getting back to somebody like Matthew Stafford, whose talent is much more through the roof than somebody like Phillip Rivers is, and in someone like Matthew Stafford who's still very well in his prime, this team obviously has Super Bowl chances, and they can actually compete with somebody like the Indianapolis Colts, and they have a decent defense to boot. So, in my opinion, that is why the Indianapolis Colts are that number 1 team to trade for Matthew Stafford. With all that being said, that's going to be the video for me. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you leave a like. If you didn't, make sure you leave a dislike. Any feedback from you all at this point is much appreciated. If you're new here, make sure you hit subscribe. If you're one of my returning 68 or so subscribers, I appreciate you a lot. Make sure you leave a comment, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.